They carved gods into mountains, buried secrets beneath jungle canopies, aligned entire cities with the stars, and then vanished. For every monument we've unearthed in ancient America, a dozen more mysteries stare back unsolved, unspoken, and utterly insane. This isn't just history. It's a trail of cosmic riddles, impossible technologies, vanishing cultures, and ancient whispers that refuse to die. From lost cities to buried giants, from serpent mounds to sunken roads, these are the stories your textbook skipped. Welcome to 50 Most Unsolved Ancient America Mysteries That Cannot Be Explained. Just don't expect closure. Expect awe. The Nazca Lines. From the air, they look like messages. Etched across 190 square miles of the Peruvian desert, the Nazca Lines are an ancient scrawl of lines, animals, and geometric precision so massive they can only be fully seen from the sky. A hummingbird stretching 305 feet, a monkey coiled like a question, straight lines that run laser-sharp for miles across scorched earth. They are so clean, so intentional, that some early 20th century explorers speculated they were alien landing strips. And for once, that theory didn't sound entirely absurd. But let's take a breath. These lines were made over 2,000 years ago by the Nazca people without satellites, drones, or a single airplane to admire them from above. They removed the dark, oxidized topsoil to reveal the lighter clay beneath, creating contrast against the desert. That's all it took. Scratch the surface, and the desert would keep your mark for centuries. The real mystery isn't how they made them, it's why. Was it religion? Art? Astronomy? Maps? Theories fall like sand through fingers. Some researchers believe the geoglyphs are an enormous celestial calendar, aligning with solstices and planetary movements. Others suggest the lines were pathway ceremonial roads meant to be walked, not viewed. In that version, the desert itself becomes a sacred stage, and the act of walking the lines is a ritual, a prayer carved into earth. There's even the suggestion that the figures represent gods themselves, bird, spider, jaguar symbols, meant to be seen by deities watching from above, a visual voicemail for the divine. And then there's the water theory. In one of the driest places on Earth, some scholars believe the lines point to subterranean aquifers, guiding thirsty desert dwellers to lifeblood beneath the sand. That would mean the drawings weren't just spiritual, they were survival tools. But even that doesn't explain the sheer scale, or the aesthetic precision, or why some figures can only be properly seen from 1,500 feet upon altitude unreachable to the Nazca. Were they mapping for gods, or for something else entirely? The truth is, we don't know. We might never know. The desert doesn't speak. It only keeps secrets. But while the sun bleaches, bones and civilizations collapse, the lines remain etched like memory, daring us to make sense of their silence. And if a civilization could draw perfect lines for miles just to communicate with the sky, imagine what they might have built to track the stars themselves. The antikythera mechanism's American counterpart. Picture this: an ancient machine so precise, so eerily modern, it could predict solar eclipses, track the movements of planets, and map the rhythm of time itself. That's the Antikythera mechanisma Greek marvel of bronze gears buried under centuries of sea rot. But while Europe found its ancient analog computer, the Americas offer only whispers. The unsettling question: did the New World have its own? We don't have a definitive Antikythera of the Americas. No bronze clockwork excavated from temple ruins. No gears corroded into cryptic death. But the mystery lies not in what we found, but in what might still be buried. Pre-Columbian civilizations were obsessed with time. Obsessed. The Maya, in particular, weren't just sky watchers, they were time engineers. They constructed calendar systems so intricate, they rivaled and even surpassed those of their Old World contemporaries. Their long count calendar stretches across epochs. They tracked Venus cycles with eerie precision, lunar phases, solar zeniths, eclipses, and they built entire cities, entire empires aligned to the stars. So what did they use to calculate all that? Stone temples and naked eyes? Or something more? Some believe ancient American astronomers may have crafted devices lost to time, swallowed by jungle and decay, made not of bronze and gears but of wood, bone, string, or even stone. Materials that wouldn't survive 2 millennia of humidity and conquest. What if there once existed instruments, simple yet precise, designed to model planetary cycles or align temple construction to celestial events? There are even hints in surviving objects. The Inca's quipu, often dismissed as a counting tool, may have encoded time sequences or cosmological knowledge. Maya codices contain detailed astronomical charts that required generations of observation and calculation. But did they calculate it all by hand? With what? How? And here's where the silence turns deafening. If the Greeks left us a rusted hunk of clockwork genius at the bottom of the sea, where's the American equivalent? Hidden in a collapsed temple? Burned by conquistadors? Discarded as myth? We may never find it, but the lack of evidence is its own kind of evidence. Something this advanced doesn't just appear, it develops. And what was lost may have once existed in materials and minds we've only begun to understand. And yet, no amount of mechanical brilliance could save one of the most sophisticated American civilizations from sudden, spectacular collapse. The collapse of the classic Maya. They built cities like gods, towering stone pyramids wrapped in hieroglyphs, ball courts echoing with the thump of rubber, observatories that touched the stars. And then, one by one, the great cities of the classic Maya went silent. Tikal, Copan, Palenque, Calakmul, gone, not all at once, not in fire or blood, but in waves, collapse, abandonment, overgrown silence. By the end of the 9th century, the urban heart of the Maya world had fallen into ruin. The question still haunts archaeologists, historians, and dreamers alike. Why? The Maya collapse isn't a single event. It's a slow-motion disaster, centuries in the making. But it happened with shocking intensity in certain regions. One decade, Tikal's kings were carving stone to boast of astronomical mastery and divine rule. The next, the temples were empty, the stelae unfinished. So what happened? Drought, say the climatologists. Multiple brutal droughts, backed up by sediment samples and isotope records. The rain stopped coming. Crops failed. Water reservoirs ran dry. In a land where water is life, this was a death sentence. But that's only part of the picture. The Maya also tore themselves apart. Warfare escalated. City fought city in endless cycles of revenge, sacrifice, and retribution. Political alliances fractured. Nobles clashed. Palaces burned. The collapse wasn't peaceful. It was chaotic. And then there's the environment itself. The Maya cut down vast tracts of rainforest to build their cities and fuel their fires. Deforestation led to erosion. Erosion led to crop failure. The land turned against them, one harvest at a time. But here's the twist. The Maya didn't disappear. They moved, shifted, survived. In the northern lowlands, cities like Chichen Itza and Uxmal rose to power. Even today, millions of Maya descendants live across Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. The culture endured. The empire didn't. Still, the collapse of the classic cities remains one of history's great cautionary tales. A civilization with writing, astronomy, agriculture, and architectural mastery undone not by one catastrophe, but by a perfect storm of their own making. And speaking of storms of mystery, the next enigma lies not in the jungles of Central America, but under a grassy hill in Ohio, the Serpent Mound. It slithers through the earth, like a creature frozen mid-motion. Nearly 1,400 feet long, coiled in 7 sinuous curves, with its jaws agape toward a mound-encircled ovalthe, Serpent Mound of Ohio is ancient, eerie and defiant of easy explanation. You don't stumble across it, you ascend to it. And once you do, you feel something primal in your chest, like you've walked into a symbol that predates language. First discovered by settlers in the 19th century, the Serpent Mound immediately provoked awe and confusion. Who built it? When? And why in this shop a serpent, devouring or birthing something circular and cosmic? Carbon dating complicates things. Some evidence points to the Adena culture around 300 BCE. Other findings suggest the Fort Ancient culture, nearly 1,000 years later. It's possible multiple cultures added to or repurposed the mound over centuries, but that only thickens the mystery. This wasn't a one-time construction, it was a legacy project. A message passed forward. And what's the message? Some believe the serpent is a symbol of rebirth, shedding old skins. Others see a mythic dragon swallowing the Sunan eclipse metaphor grounded in the sky. And then there's the alignment. Because of course, there's alignment. The serpent's head points almost perfectly to the summer solstice sunset. Its coils might track lunar cycles. Some even argue it encodes a 1,000-year eclipse calendar in dirt and grass. Astronomy? Spirituality? Ritual pathway? Burial site? All of the above? None? No bodies have been found inside the serpent itself, but nearby burial mounds suggest the site had spiritual weight. This wasn't a casual construction, it was planned, calculated, and enormous. Built without metal tools, bulldozers, or GPS, just people, baskets, and the cosmos in their heads. The Serpent Mound endures not just because of what it is, but because of what it suggests. That ancient Americans had a deep, sophisticated relationship with the sky. They weren't just watching stars. They were communicating with them through dirt, stone, sacrifice, and myth. And if a snake made of earth could embody cosmic truths, then imagine the mystery behind the crop that made civilizations rise, a grass that became gold. The origin of maize. It doesn't look like a miracle. It looks like dinner. A corn cob, yellow, stubby, wrapped in husks. But thousands of years ago, on the cusp of the unknown, someone in ancient Mesoamerica took one look at a wild grass called Teotihuacan, rock-hard kernels barely worth chewing, and thought, I can do something with this. That one decision would feed empires. Maize didn't happen overnight. It took centuries, maybe millennia of careful, obsessive selection. Early farmers chose the most edible, largest seeds, planted them, and repeated the cycle again and again until the kernels grew soft, the cob grew fat, and a weed became a world-shaping crop. But here's the unsettling part. Teosint and maize are genetically so different, it's almost inexplicable. There's no known intermediate form in the fossil record. One day, there's grass, and the next, civilization's favorite carbohydrate. So how did ancient people manage such precise bioengineering without microscopes, without textbooks, without Mendel or CRISPR? Maize is completely dependent on humans to grow. It cannot reproduce in the wild. It's a symbiotic creation, half nature, half culture. That level of agricultural manipulation suggests not just intelligence, but foresight, coordination, and generations of experimentation passed down like sacred knowledge. And then there's the question of why. Why invest centuries of labor in transforming a stubborn grass into a food staple? Was it survival? Was it ritual? Was maize, like the pyramid or the quipu, not just practical but spiritual, something to be worshipped, enshrined in myth? Maize appears in almost every major Mesoamerican mythology. The Maya believed humans were made from maize. The Aztecs worshipped Centeotl, the maize god. In these stories, corn isn't just food. It's identity, it's life, it's divine. So, while we know maize came from teosint, we still don't know how ancient geneticists pulled it off, or where exactly it first happened, or who decided to shape history with a stalk. What we do know is that every tortilla, every arepa, every elote carries the imprint of that original agricultural miracle, a transformation so extreme it borders on impossible. And where there's food, there's community. Where there's surplus, there's complexity. And sometimes, in the middle of nowhere, there's a mysterious complex of earth and geometry that suggests purpose far beyond mere survival. The purpose of Poverty Point. Deep in northeastern Louisiana, in a place with no stone, no metal, no cities in sight, ancient hunter-gatherers did something no one expected. They built a monumental earthwork complex. Massive mounds and concentric ridges arranged in arcs that seemed too organized, too deliberate for a people without agriculture or hierarchy at least. That's what we thought. Welcome to Poverty Point. Built around 3,500 years ago, it predates the pyramids of Giza. It's older than the Maya. And it was made not by farmers but by foragers, which is where the mystery begins. Why would a society of mobile hunter-gatherers people who didn't settle permanently, who lived off fishing, gathering, and small game hunting construct something so enormous, so complex? The concentric ridges, when viewed from above, resemble a massive fingerprint embedded into the earth, a plaza wider than a football field, mounds towering 70 feet high, over 30 million basket loads of earth moved by hand. For what? Some argue it was a trade center, given the vast array of artifacts found there. Stones from the Appalachians, copper from the Great Lakes, materials from hundreds of miles away. Others think it was a ceremonial site, a place of pilgrimage and ritual. The layout might have astronomical alignments. It might encode spiritual narratives. Or it might have been a theater of society itself, a stage where people gathered seasonally to renew bonds, exchange goods, witness performances, or honor the cosmos. But the absence of burial remains, the lack of agriculture, the sheer scale of laborat all resists easy interpretation. Poverty Point doesn't make sense. It shouldn't exist. And yet it does, carved into Louisiana soil with a confidence that suggests deep knowledge, deep purpose. Then there's the kicker. It was abandoned. No war, no fire, no collapse, just left behind. Like it had served its function, whispered its secrets, and then faded back into the landscape. And in that silence, a new riddle emerges about roads to nowhere, and what drives a civilization to draw lines across an empty desert. The Chaco Canyon roads. Out in the New Mexico desert, where the wind carves stone and the sun peels paint from bones, lie roads, not trails, not footpaths. Roads perfectly straight, engineered across canyons, mesas, and landscapes that defy logic. They radiate from Chaco Canyon like spokes from a wheel. Some stretch over 30 miles. Some climb sheer cliffs, and many lead nowhere. The ancestral Puebloans of Chaco weren't messing around. Between 900 and 1150 CE, they built monumental stone complexes with multi-story great houses and massive kivas. The architecture is aligned with solstices and lunar standstills. Their engineering was deliberate, celestial. But the roads? The roads are surreal. They're up to 30 feet wide, laser straight, ignoring terrain entirely. When a cliff gets in the way, the road ramps up. When a canyon cuts across, they build stairs. Why? What were they connecting? Some roads link known outlier settlements. That makes sense, but many don't. They lead to isolated features, to nowhere, to nothing, no villages, no shrines, no resources. Just the echo of footsteps through dust. One theory is symbolic movement. Pilgrimage routes, ritual processions, paths for the dead or the divine. Another suggests astronomical alignments, terrestrial shadows cast for celestial dances. Still others see them as psychological, a projection of order onto a chaotic world. Whatever the purpose, the effort was colossal and unnecessary. if it was just for transport. These weren't trade highways. They were statements, messages, possibly prayers. And like Chaco itself, the roads were abandoned, left to crack under the desert sun. No war, no disaster, just a quiet exodus. But some of their secrets remain like the artifacts that lie in jungle soil, shaped into perfect spheres, daring us to ask, who made these and why? The giant stone balls of Costa Rica. They sit in fields. They hide in the jungle. They line up with uncanny precision or appear utterly random. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, some as small as a bowling ball, others nearly 8 feet across and weighing several tons, are among the most visually jarring archaeological puzzles in the Americas. Made of hard igneous rock, carved with incredible symmetry, and polished to near perfection, these orbs seem like the handiwork of some ancient cosmic sculptor, or at least someone with too much time and way too much math. Roughly 300 of these stones have been found, scattered mainly in the Diquís Delta region. No written records, no carvings, no inscriptions, just spheres. Alone or in groups, buried or displayed, they defy explanation. How are they made? The local rock granodiorite's tough stuff. You don't just chisel it into a perfect sphere with a stick and hope. It takes time, effort, tools, and above all, intent. These weren't formed by erosion, they were carved, purposefully, painstakingly, over and over again. But the people who created them, likely part of the Diquís culture, left no blueprint. No how-to guide, not even a hint of why. Were they symbols of power? Did chiefs or shamans use them to mark territory? Were they aligned with stars, solstices, or seasonal changes? Some were found in geometric patterns, lines, triangles, rectangles, almost like a prehistoric game board or a sacred layout. Others were isolated, moved far from their original context by farmers, looters, or modern landscaping. There are theories, of course, that they represented the sun, that they mimicked celestial bodies, that they marked burial sites or ceremonial centers, that they were rolled from quarry to village in great communal rituals, but none of that explains the sheer volume, consistency, or craftsmanship. Nor does it explain the mystery that follows us into the jungles of Mesoamerica, people who carve stone heads the size of SUVs with equally cryptic intent. The Olmec colossal heads. Each one is a face frozen in time. Wide noses, thick lips, fierce expressions. Carved from basalt and weighing up to 50 tons, the Olmec colossal heads stand like ancient titans in the tropical heat of southern Mexico. 17 have been found. 17 mysteries. We know the Olmecs were the first major civilization in Mesoamerica, flourishing from around 1500 BCE to 400 BCE. We know they built cities, developed writing, and worshipped jaguar gods. But these head-stowering, monolithic, unapologetically bold tell us something else. They tell us someone mattered. Someone was worth remembering in stone. But who? The prevailing theory is that these are portraits of rulers. Each unique, each perhaps a different leader, immortalized with the kind of craftsmanship normally reserved for gods. But that raises another question. How did they do it? The basalt used for most of the heads comes from mountains dozens of miles away. No wheels, no beasts of burden. Just manpower, river rafts, and unrelenting determination. Transporting one of these heads through jungle and marsh would have been a logistical nightmare. Yet they did it again and again. And once they got the stone home, they didn't just plop it down. They carved it, often with incredible detail: helmets, ear spools, facial features that seem almost defiant in their realism. No two are alike. That's not mass production. That's personalized legacy. Were these rulers deified? Were the heads part of ritual spaces, courts, or tombs? Or were they warning marker silent guardians placed to impress, intimidate, or control? Some speculate the heads show African features, stirring debates over pre-Columbian contact across oceans. But these theories often ignore the diversity of indigenous American physiognomy and risk overshadowing the Olmec's native genius. In truth, the heads speak a language of power. Whoever these men were, they ruled a people capable of monumental art and unthinkable effort, but like the stone itself, their identities remain unyielding. And speaking of disappearances, the Olmec legacy flows directly into the cultures that rose after, except for one group that didn't rise but vanished. The disappearance of the Anasazi ancestral Puebloans. They didn't just leave, they left with intention. They left in waves. They left behind entire cities' cliffside dwellings, kivas carved into rock, and towers overlooking canyon floors abandoned like a bedtime story that never got finished. The ancestral Puebloans, once called the Anasazi, built a civilization of stone and astronomy in the American Southwest, and then they were gone. Between 900 and 1300 CE, they constructed some of the most awe-inspiring settlements in North America: Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, Canyon de Chelly. These weren't simple homes. They were engineered, space-aligned with celestial bodies, filled with ceremonial chambers, and linked by roads and trade routes. So why did they leave? Climate, for one. The region experienced devastating droughts. Crops failed, water vanished. Life in the canyons became unsustainable. But climate alone doesn't explain the cultural unraveling. Evidence of warfare, social tension, and possibly even cannibalism suggest a breakdown not just of environment, but of trust, of community. Signs of defensive architecture appear in the late stages: cliff dwellings harder to access, walls thicker, sightlines more strategic. This wasn't just migration, it was survival. And yet, they didn't disappear entirely. They became the ancestors of today's Pueblo peoples, the Hopi, Zuni, and others who maintain oral histories of migration, struggle, and spiritual transformation. To them, the Great Exodus wasn't an end, it was a renewal. Still, for the rest of us looking back, the silence of Chaco's great houses feels like a ghost. Empty plazas where once thousands gathered, astronomical markers aligned to solstices, waiting for no one. And just when you think you've reached the edge of mystery, you find a piece of parchmenta map that may rewrite the very story of who first touched American soil. The Vinland Map. It shouldn't exist. That's the problem. The Vinland Map, allegedly dating to the 15th century, shows parts of North America, specifically Vinland, long before Columbus ever set sail. It's a piece of parchment that might casually rewrite everything you learned in school. If real, it means Europeans knew about North America decades before 1492, and not just through sagas or sailors' drunken rumors, but through documented, cartographic proof. The map first surfaced in the mid-20th century, wrapped in controversy and academic suspicion. It shows Greenland accurately unconnected to Europe or North America, a major feat of geographic understanding. But most striking is Vinland, marked clearly west of Greenland. This would match Norse sagas describing Leif Erikson's journey to a lush, distant shore across the Atlantic. If it's authentic, the implications are massive. It would prove that Viking contact with the Americas wasn't just legended, was charted knowledge passed down, preserved, and potentially suppressed. It would also challenge the entire Columbus first narrative, but that's a big if. Chemical analyses of the ink suggest it may have been created with modern materials, raising red flags about forgery, but the results are hotly debated. Some experts argue the inconsistencies are due to contamination or flawed testing. Others say the map's features, its style, script, and layout match 15th century maps too closely for a modern forger to have guessed correctly. So, either it's one of the most incredible pre-Columbian artifacts ever found, or one of the most elaborate hoaxes in academic history. And if it's a fake, it still begs the question, why fake this? Why not a more lucrative or famous map? Why create something so academically niche and so guaranteed to provoke endless scrutiny? Either way, The Vinland Map is less about what it shows and more about what it suggests. That history is rarely as tidy as textbooks make it seem. That old stories of Vikings and voyages, of windswept shores and lost colonies might carry more truth than we're ready to admit. Speaking of lost colonies, let's talk about the one that literally vanished into the trees. The lost colony of Roanoke. A single word carved into a post. Croatoan. That's all they left behind. In 1587, over 100 English settlers established a colony on Roanoke Island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. It was the first English attempt at a permanent settlement in the New World. But when their governor, John White, returned from a supply trip to England 3 years later, the colony was gone. No people, no bodies, no signs of struggle, just Croatoan. And just like that, Roanoke passed from history into legend. What happened to them? Some believe the colonists integrated with local Native American tribes, particularly the Croatan, hence the carving. This theory is supported by later reports of English-looking individuals among the tribes, but nothing definitive ever surfaced. Others believe they died from disease, starvation, or conflictither with the environment or with neighboring tribes. Some even speculate they tried to sail back to England and were lost at sea. Then there's the darker edge: abduction, massacre, betrayal. But no bones were found, no scorched ruins, just eerie silence and that cryptic word like a message left mid-thought. Roanoke isn't just a mystery. It's an origin myth. It's the haunting opening chapter of English colonization in America. One that set the tone with uncertainty, failure, and the creeping suspicion that the New World could swallow you whole without a trace. The lost colony was never found. No mass grave, no diary, no triumphant survivor with a tale of hardship and redemption. Just a void where a community should have been. But buried deeper in America's past literally are even older signs of industry. Tools forged not in Europe, but in copper-rich soil by ancient hands. The copper culture of the Great Lakes. Long before steel mills, before skyscrapers, before anyone named Carnegie ever swung a pickaxe, ancient people were mining copper in the upper Great Lakes. And not just tinkering with it, they were working it with remarkable skill. Known as the copper culture, these people lived over 6,000 years ago. That's millennia before the Egyptians built pyramids. Yet they were diving into open-pit mines on the shores of Lake Superior, extracting raw copper, cold hammering it into tools, weapons, fishhooks, and beads. No smelting, no forges. Just raw ingenuity and brute force. Tons of copper were removed. Some estimates go as high as 500,000 pounds, yet only a fraction of it has ever been recovered in archaeological sites. So the question hangs. Where did all that copper go? Some fringe theories leap to Old World contact, suggesting the copper was shipped across the Atlantic to fuel Bronze Age civilizations. There's no hard evidence for that. But the sheer volume mined and the sophisticated tools left behind make it hard to believe it all stayed local. The copper culture people didn't build cities. They didn't leave behind writing. But they had trade routes. Artifacts made from Lake Superior copper have been found as far south as Alabama and as far west as the Great Plains. That's a continent-wide network, powered by shiny metal passed from hand to hand across centuries. Who exactly they were is still up for debate. Their burials suggest ritual, hierarchy, and reverence for the dead. They treated copper not just as utility, but as status. The artifacts they left behind glint like whispers from a vanished world. And just as they vanished, a new mystery rises not in metal, but in megaliths. From a city that shone once like a beacon and now sleeps in stone. The Teotihuacan Pyramids Alignments. Teotihuacan doesn't whisper, it booms, even in silence. Located in the highlands of central Mexico, the ancient city of Teotihuacan was once the largest urban center in the Americashome to tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands at its peak. Its heart is a spine-straight boulevard known as the Avenue of the Dead, flanked by towering pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon. And they aren't just tall, they're aligned, deeply, mysteriously, obsessively aligned. The entire city was laid out with mathematical rigor. The Avenue of the Dead runs at a precise angle 15.5 degrees east of true north. Not an accident, not a fluke, something cosmic. Something engineered. The Pyramid of the Sun, the third largest pyramid in the world, is oriented toward the point on the horizon where the sun sets on specific days of the year, likely days, significant for agricultural or ceremonial reasons. The Pyramid of the Moon anchors the opposite end, situated to mirror a nearby mountain, Cerro Gordo, suggesting a deliberate link between the earthly and the divine. Some researchers propose that the city is aligned with the movements of certain stars or planets, especially Venus, which played a huge role in Mesoamerican cosmology. Others say it reflects the solar zenith passage when the sun passes directly overhead, a major moment in regions without seasons. But the real question is, why such precision? Teotihuacan's architects weren't just building for shelter or status, they were building for the sky. The alignment suggests the city itself was a calendar, a sacred machine. A mirror of the heavens, locked in stone. Rituals were likely timed not by clocks, but by shadows, by the light moving across the plaza, by the sun hitting the altar at just the right moment. And then there's the mystery of the people who built it because we don't know who they were. By the time the Aztecs arrived centuries later, the city was already ancient, abandoned, and legendary. They gave it the name we use today, Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. Whatever cosmic code the builders embedded in their pyramids, it wasn't just about worship, it was about control, of time, of space, of meaning. And while some marvel at these alignments, others are baffled by a bowl unearthed in Bolivia with writing that shouldn't exist. The Fuente Magna bowl. Imagine a bowl, not particularly large, not adorned with gold or jewels, but one that could crack the foundations of what we think we know about the ancient world. Discovered near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, the Fuente Magna bowl is a ceramic artifact that carries an explosive claim. It appears to bear cuneiform writing, yes, that's Sumerian-style script etched into its surface. Alongside it are what some believe to be Proto-Sumerian characters and symbols strikingly similar to those found in Mesopotamia, thousands of miles away, across an ocean, on a different continent, in an entirely different timeline. If it's real, it's seismic. It would suggest some form of pre-Columbian contact between the old world and the new that defies mainstream archaeology. Not Viking-style island hopping across the North Atlantic, but a Mesopotamian leap across the open seasome, thing completely unsupported by any existing trade records, ship technology, or migration models. Unsurprisingly, the bowl has become a lightning rod. Some scholars denounce it as a modern hoax or misinterpretation. Others defend its authenticity fiercely, pointing to its patina, excavation context, and the supposed consistency of the inscriptions. The biggest problem? Its provenance is murky. The details of its discovery are inconsistent. The bowl's journey from soil to spotlight is poorly documented, leaving ample room for skepticism. But if we assume, just for a moment, that it is real, the implications are wild. It would force a complete rethinking of isolationist views of pre-Columbian history. It might suggest ancient navigators reached the Americas centuries or millennia before Columbus, the Vikings, or even Polynesians. It would also imply that ancient Sumerians, or a culture closely connected to them, made it to South America and left a trace, however faint. Still, one object does not a revolution make, but one object is enough to keep the question alive. Especially when buried deep in the Amazon jungle, DNA tells an even stranger story, one written not in stone or script, but in the very code of life, the presence of Australian DNA in Amazonian tribes. It sounds like science fiction, but it's not. It's genetics, and it's unsettling. In some of the most remote indigenous tribes of the Amazon rainforest, researchers have discovered traces of DNA linked not to East Asia, the traditional source of Native American ancestry, but to Australian Aborigines and Melanesians. Let that sink in. This isn't a tiny blip or contamination error. It's a significant genetic marker, dubbed Population Y by scientists, that shows a deep ancestral connection between certain South American groups and peoples from thousands of miles across the Pacific. But how? The dominant theory of American settlement involves migration over the Bering Land Bridge during the Ice Age. Siberians walking into Alaska, spreading south over millennia. That much holds. But Australian DNA? In the Amazon? Some hypothesize an earlier, separate migration one that took a coastal route down Asia and across the Pacific, arriving in South America long before the better-known Beringian settlers. Others imagine a more radical scenario: ancient seafarers making an impossible voyage across open ocean, reaching the New World through sheer luck, desperate survival, or some lost navigation skill. There's no direct archaeological evidence for such a journey. No boats, no tools, no art, just genes, ghosts in the blood. This discovery doesn't erase the Siberian connection, it adds a layer, a mystery within a mystery. And it suggests that human movement has always been more chaotic, more tangled, and more audacious than we've given it credit for. Because if some ancient mariner made it from Australia to the Amazon, what else have we underestimated? What other alignments, constructions, or carvings have we mislabeled as myth when they might have been messages, carved in stone by people who knew exactly what they were doing? Like a serpent made of soil, coiled not for attack but to point at the stars. The great serpent of Ohio's connection to the stars. It rises from the earth in impossible Silencian, ancient creature made not of flesh but of soil and symmetry. The Serpent Mound of Ohio is one of the most enigmatic earthworks in the Americas. But this isn't just about its massive scale or sinuous shape. No, the deeper riddle is celestial. What if this coiled beast is actually an astronomical instrument? Stretching nearly 1,400 feet, the serpent winds its body through the landscape with geometric grace. Its open mouth encircles an oval, possibly an egg, a sun, or a cosmic symbol of rebirth. But beyond its visual drama lies something more unsettling: its alignment. Many scholars believe the Serpent Mound's curves correspond to lunar phases, solstices, or even eclipses. Some propose that the serpent's head aligns with the setting sun on the summer solstice. Others point to the tail's precise coils, arguing they mimic lunar standstills extreme points in the moon's 18.6-year cycle. These alignments aren't accidental. They're engineered, intentional. But the people who built the mound, likely the fort ancient culture, had no written records, no telescopes, no star charts as we define them, just observation, generations of it. So if the serpent tracks the sky, it means those who built it were stargazers of rare discipline. They weren't just worshipping the heavens, they were reading them. And why a serpent? In many Native American mythologies, the serpent is a liminal figure, part guardian, part destroyer, part bridge between worlds. It tunnels through the underworld, climbs into the sky, coils around creation itself. Perhaps the Serpent Mound isn't just a calendar. Perhaps it's a map, or a symbol, or a warning. Whatever its purpose, the mound is far more than a pile of dirt. It's a celestial monument, a prehistoric observatory with teeth. And if it's part of a conversation with the stars, then it's one echoed in stone by the master builders of the Andeshu, shaped their myths not in mounds, but in megaliths. The megalithic structures of Bolivia, Puma Punku. At nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, where the air is thin and time feels slower, lies a site that makes modern engineers sweat. Puma Punku, part of the larger Tiwanaku complex in Bolivia, is a graveyard of precision-cut stone blocksome weighing up to 100 tons scattered like the remnants of a civilization that dared the impossible. These stones weren't just big, they were detailed, interlocking, geometrically perfect. Some have grooves and cuts, so fine, it's as if they were machined yet they predate the Inca. Possibly built between 500 and 1000 CE, Puma Punku was constructed without metal tools, wheels, or draft animals. So how did they move them? How did they shape them? That's where the mystery deepens. The quarry for many of these blocks was miles away. Transporting them across rugged terrain at that altitude would be punishing even today. Some of the stones are andesite volcanic rock hard enough to require diamond-tipped tools, but the builders of Puma Punku left no metal, no chisels, no scaffolding, just stone. Shaped like it was butter. Theories spiral. Some say advanced lost technology. Others whisper about ancient knowledge of acoustic levitation or forgotten metallurgy. But even without invoking aliens or Atlantis, the fact remains. The site challenges everything we thought ancient people could do. Then there's the layout: right angles, H-shaped blocks, tight joints that resist even a razor blade. Was this a ceremonial center, a sacred complex, a calendrical temple, or a cosmic map etched in volcanic stone? Puma Punku wasn't just a place, it was a statement. One that said, we can move mountains, literally, and then we can carve them with such elegance that our descendants will mistake our tools for magic. But magic sometimes hides in smaller, stranger packages, like a set of discs found where they shouldn't be, hinting at a presence older than history itself. The Cache Creek discs. They're flat, they're carved, and they don't belong. Found in British Columbia's Cache Creek area, these enigmatic stone discs don't fit the profile of known indigenous artifacts. Made of hard stone, some feature intricate carving spirals, grids, notch shapes that seem more mechanical than ornamental. And the real shocker? Some researchers claim they predate the Clovis culture. If true, they represent a whole other chapter of human presence in North America. One that's been missing from every textbook. The problem is context. These discs weren't discovered in a pristine dig site, labeled and dated with academic rigor. They surfaced in bits and fragments, often uncovered accidentally or in areas disturbed by later activity. That means dating them is difficult, controversial, but it also means they can't be easily dismissed. Their purpose is equally elusive. Some think they were weights or parts of an unknown tool system. Others suspect they served ritual or symbolic roles. But there's something eerily technological about their design precision that implies intention far beyond basic function. If they truly come from a pre-Clovis period, it would suggest that humans occupied North America far earlier than believed, and not just lived, but built, crafted, innovated. Left behind traces we can't yet interpret. The Cache Creek discs may be outliers, or they may be the first breadcrumbs on a path we've ignored. A path that leads straight into a long-forgotten showdown between humans and creatures too big to ignore. Creatures that once ruled the Americas, until they didn't. The extinction of the Megafauna. Once upon a time, the Americas were home to giants. Mammoths roamed the plains, mastodons crushed forests beneath their feet, and glyptodons armored tanks the size of Volkswagen slumbered through the undergrowth. There were saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths taller than grizzly bears, and beavers the size of pit bulls. Then, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, they were gone. Roughly 10,000 years ago, most of North America's megafauna vanished. Extinct, wiped out in a mass disappearance that has haunted archaeologists and ecologists for decades. What caused this dramatic die-off? The prevailing theory split into two camps: climate or humans. Climate change, specifically the warming that ended the last ice age, reshaped ecosystems. Forests replaced grasslands. Water sources shifted. Prey patterns changed. But here's the problem. Large mammals had survived previous climate swings. They'd adapted, moved, evolved. So why did they crumble this time? That's where humans come in. Around the same time these animals disappeared, early Paleo-Indian cultures, most famously, the Clovis people, were spreading across the continent. Armed with razor-sharp stone points and coordinated hunting techniques, they could bring down massive prey. Evidence from kill sites shows mammoths and mastodons pierced by fluted Clovis points, often dismembered with surgical efficiency. The theory? Humans hunted the megafauna into extinction, not just through overhunting, but by targeting keystone species animals whose removal destabilized entire ecosystems. Some propose a hybrid theory. The changing climate weakened the megafauna's numbers, and human predation finished the job. Others go further, suggesting disease introduced by humans or their dogs played a role. There's even speculation about comet impacts or solar events, but those remain fringe. Whatever the cause, the effect was profound. The disappearance of megafauna transformed North America's ecological landscape and shaped human survival strategies for millennia. But the story doesn't end with death, because just as humans were adapting to this new world, some were weaving messages into string messages we still haven't deciphered. The purpose of the Caral-Supe Quipu. Long before the Incas ruled the Andes, long before the empire of gold and stone, there was Caral-Supe. One of the oldest known civilizations in the Americas, it rose quietly along the Peruvian coast around 2600 BCE, contemporaneous with Egypt's first pyramids. And like Egypt, it built monumental architecture. Massive platform mounds, sunken plazas, and a society organized enough to engineer irrigation and labor systems. But Caral-Supe left behind no writing, or did they? Among the artifacts found at the site are quipu bundles of knotted strings, eerily similar to those used by the Inca thousands of years later. These cords, with their knots and color codes, were traditionally thought to be record-keeping device accounting tools for census and tribute. But what if they were more? Some scholars believe the quipu at Caral-Supe represent the earliest form of proto-writing in the Americas, that each knot isn't just a number, but a syllable, a name, a word. If true, then Caral-Supe didn't just invent architecture. They may have created the seeds of narrative, of memory, of bureaucracy and ritual, encoded in threads. But decoding them is the problem. Without a Rosetta Stone or parallel system, modern researchers are left guessing. Are these quipu ceremonial? Administrative? Do they mark astronomical events, sacred calendars, or harvest schedules? Were they worn, displayed, hidden? Adding to the intrigue is the fact that Caral-Supe seems to have been a peaceful society, no fortifications, no weapons found. Could the quipu have been a tool for diplomacy, trade, religion? A way to preserve cosmic rhythms and fiber? The idea that the earliest known city in the Americas may have invented a non-verbal string-based data system millennia before laptops boggles the modern brain. And it throws us directly into another mystery of identity, one found in the bones of a man who should never have been where he was. The Kennewick Man controversy. In 1996, two college students stumbled upon a skull along the banks of the Columbia River in Kennewick, Washington. At first, it looked recent, maybe, even a modern murder victim. But radiocarbon dating told a different story. The remains were over 9,000 years old. Kennewick Man wasn't just old, he was out of place. His skeletal features didn't match those typically associated with modern Native American groups. Early reports described them as Caucasoid, which launched a firestorm of speculation. Was he a European? An ancient traveler from across the sea? A member of a now extinct migration? The scientific community split. Some called for more testing. Others cautioned against jumping to racialized conclusions. Meanwhile, local Native American tribes demanded the return of the remains under NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, asserting cultural and ancestral ties. The bones became a battlefield between science and spirituality. Research and respect, data and tradition. Lawsuits dragged on for years. Kennewick Man was boxed up, locked away, studied, and argued over. He became an icon, a lightning rod, and a cautionary tale all in one. Eventually, DNA analysis was performed. The results? Kennewick Man shared close genetic ties with modern Native American populations, particularly the Colville tribe of the Pacific Northwest. The controversy didn't vanish, but it shifted. The question was no longer about race, but about the right to interpret history. Who owns the past? The scientists trying to understand it, or the descendants who carry its memory? Kennewick Man was finally returned and reburied in 2017, but his presence still lingers a skeleton that unraveled assumptions and redefined the limits of migration, identity, and ancient lineage in the Americas. And while some debates are etched in DNA, others are trapped in silence, like the speech of a civilization lost to time and a language no one can yet speak. The language of the Olmec. They were the first great civilization of Mesoamerica. Long before the Maya etched kings into stone and the Aztecs raised temples to the sun, the Olmec carved jaguar gods into basalt and left behind heads as massive as myths. They built cities, traded across vast distances, influenced every major culture that followed, and yet we do not know what they called themselves. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't even know how they sounded. The Olmec script is one of the oldest known forms of writing in the Americas. Fragments of it have been found on stone stelae, jade celts, and curious artifacts like the Cascajal Blaka tablet of Serpentine, inscribed with glyphs that might be phonetic, logographic, or symbolic. Or all three. Or none. That's the problem. We don't have enough examples. Unlike Mayan glyphs, which cover temples and codices in an avalanche of narrative, the Olmec left behind only fragments. Symbols carved with purpose, but with no key. No translation. No parallel text. Just an ancient code with no password. What language were they writing in? Some scholars propose it was a Proto-Mixi-Zoquian tongue, the linguistic ancestor of languages still spoken in southern Mexico today. Others suggest early forms of Maya, or even entirely lost linguistic families with no modern descendants. But with so little to go on, it's all conjecture. We can't even be sure that what we call writing was intended as such. Was it phonetic? Syllabic? Was it proto-writing, used only by an elite priesthood to mark sacred concepts? Or was it already a full-blown script, used to record rituals, lineage, laws? What's certain is that the Olmec knew the power of symbols. They weren't just building temples, they were encoding meaning. Language, lost or not, saturates their art. Faces blend human and animal. Glyphs appear in ceremonial scenes. The visual world was speaking. We just no longer know the dialect. And the silence is deafening. Because language isn't just a tool, it's identity. To lose a language is to lose a people's thoughts, jokes, prayers, dreams. The Olmec, once the cultural engine of Mesoamerica, are now voiceless shadows in their own ruins. But even without words, they left behind echo seen in the earthworks of those who followed, who carried forward their spirit in arcs, circles, and colossal mounds carved from the American soil. The origin of the Adena and Hopewell culture's earthworks. Scattered across the eastern United States lie monumental mounds and earthen enclosures that seem to defy not just time, but imagination. Perfect circles, spirals, serpents, conical burial mounds that rise from the grass like forgotten giants. These were the creations of the Adena and Hopewell culture's people who, without stone or metal, sculpted the earth into sacred geometry. The Adena came first, emerging around 1000 BCE in what is now Ohio and surrounding states. They were followed and partially overlapped by the Hopewell, who flourished between 100 BCE and 500 CE. Their mounds range from simple conical tombs to elaborate enclosures that stretch for miles, incorporating precise astronomical alignments and geometric patterns so exact they rival modern surveyors. But here's the mystery. Where did the inspiration come from? These weren't random constructions. They were planned, deliberate, and symbolically loaded. Some align with solstices, equinoxes, and lunar standstills. Others form exact circles and octagons hundreds of feet across, carved without metal tools or the wheel. The labor required was immense, thousands of workers moving millions of cubic feet of earth with baskets and determination. And yet, we don't know why. Were they ceremonial centers, burial grounds, cosmic calendars, social gathering places, defensive structures, all of the above? Even more puzzling is the cultural origin. The Adena and Hopewell didn't leave behind writing. We infer their beliefs from bones, artifacts, and soil patterns. Some of their symbolism, like the Birdman, the Weeping Eye, the Thunderbird, suggests complex cosmology, perhaps echoing themes seen later in Mississippian religion. Their trade networks were vast. Copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, obsidian from the Rockies. These weren't isolated groups. They were nodes in a sprawling web of exchange and ideology. And yet, around 500 CE, the Hopewell tradition declined. The great enclosures were abandoned. The monumental architecture faded. The reasons remain: elusive climate shifts, social change, migration, disease. Still, their marks on the landscape remain. Immense, mathematical, mythic. And one group, nestled in the highlands of Oaxaca, took the idea of sacred symbolism even further into the very fabric of language. The Zapotec hieroglyphic writing system's origins. Before the Maya etched their history in stone, before the Aztecs spoke Nahuatl in sprawling city-states, the Zapotecs were already writing. In Monte Alban, the ancient capital of the Zapotec civilization in southern Mexico, glyphs were carved into stone slabs, glyphs that represent one of the earliest known writing systems in the Americas. They date back to around 500 BCE and appear on monuments known as danzantes, or dancer stone figures posed in dynamic, often contorted positions. At first glance, the carvings seem to depict stylized human forms, but look closer and you'll find accompanying glyphs combinations of pictorial symbols, abstract designs, and numerical bars and dots. This wasn't just decoration, this was communication. But what were they saying? Some glyphs appear to denote dates, names, or places, possibly marking the defeat of rival leaders or the conquest of foreign cities. Others seem ceremonial, perhaps ritualistic. The presence of repeated elements suggests grammar, structure, perhaps even syntax. But without a full Rosetta Stone, the system remains only partially deciphered. We can't read it like we do Maya hieroglyphs. We can only infer, guess, decode symbols in fragments, and hope they whisper truth. What's even more fascinating is how this writing system may have influenced others. Was it the precursor to the Mixtec and Zapotec codices? Did its glyphs travel, evolve, intertwine with Maya script? Or was it a parallel invention born independently from a cultural engine entirely unique to the Oaxacan highlands? The Zapotecs weren't passive recorders of their world, they were authors, chroniclers. And the stone they carved into wasn't just for gods, it was for the ages. Their words may be half lost, but the stone still speaks. And deep in the jungle, another city one still lost to myth waits to be found, or perhaps remembered. The lost city of Z in the Amazon. They called it Z, a name scrawled on maps that never quite existed, a letter that meant hope, madness, gold, or death, depending on who you asked. The lost city of Z is a legend born in the fevered minds of explorers, cartographers, and conquistadors who wandered into the green jaws of the Amazon and never came back. Most famously, it was the obsession of British explorer Percy Fawcett, who in the early 20th century believed a great, advanced civilization once thrived deep within the rainforest. He had a hunch. He had fragments of pottery, local legends, and an unwavering belief that the jungle had not always been wild. In 1925, Fawcett led an expedition into Brazil to find Z. He took his son. He vanished. No trace, no message, nothing. But the mystery didn't die with him. What makes Z more than just a ghost story is what's not there. Evidence, a missing empire, a lost infrastructure. Fawcett believed that ruins would prove South America hosted complex urban civilizations in regions the world deemed uninhabitable. At the time, the academic consensus was clear. The Amazon couldn't support large sedentary populations. Too wet, too infertile, too hostile. Yet scattered clues say otherwise. Satellite imagery has revealed geometric patterns, ditches, roads, plazas beneath the jungle canopy, signs of settlement, signs of design. Add to that the discovery of terra preta, a type of enriched soil created through human intervention, and the case strengthens. Someone, long ago, knew how to tame the Amazon, how to shape it. Was Z real? Maybe not as one glittering city of gold, but as a network of advanced, semi-urban societies spread across the forest. It's gaining traction. If that's true, then Fawcett wasn't chasing a myth. He was chasing memory. A memory buried under centuries of foliage, dismissals, and conquest. And buried within that memory are whisper-soft giants said to walk the river valleys and raise mounds in the shapes of gods. The giants of the Mississippi Valley legends. They shouldn't have existed, at least not according to standard history. But the legends persist, and so do the newspaper clippings. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, accounts emerged from the Mississippi Valley of enormous human skeletons unearthed from ancient burial mounds. Some were said to be over 7 feet tall. Others sported double rows of teeth, elongated skulls, or massive femurs far larger than average. Farmers, archaeologists, and looters alike reported them, mostly in passing, mostly without follow-up. The mounds they came from were attributed to the Adena and Hopewell cultures. Yet the skeletons seemed to exceed expected norms, fueling speculation that these were no ordinary people. Were they elites? Warriors? Genetic outliers? Or the remnants of a forgotten race? Mainstream archaeology waves it off. Most of the reports were exaggerated, misidentified, or simply sensationalized. Bones decay, measurements were inconsistent, and a double row of teeth. More likely an error of observation than a mutation. But that hasn't stopped the myth from growing. Legends among various Native American tribes describe giant beings, some benevolent, others monstrous, who once lived in the land. The Choctaw speak of Nahulo, pale-skinned giants who came from the east. The Sioux tell of a red-haired race of enormous warriors. Are these simply metaphors or distorted memories of real encounters? Some claim a Smithsonian cover-up that giant skeletons were collected and quietly erased from public records to preserve the dominant narrative. It's a conspiracy theory, sure, but the absence of clear, accessible evidence only fuels the fire. The real question may not be whether giants once roamed the Mississippi Valley, but why the idea resonates. What do we want from these myths? Power? Mystery? A trace of something bigger than ourselves? And just when you're ready to dismiss it all as tall tales, a chemical mystery from the other side of the world splashes into the story, bringing us to ancient Egypt, mummies, and 2 very familiar drugs. The presence of cocaine and nicotine in Egyptian mummies. In 1992, a scientific study detonated like a bomb across the quiet halls of archaeology. Researchers analyzing Egyptian mummies discovered traces of nicotine and cocaine in the hair and tissue compounds that, as far as anyone knew, only came from the Americas prior to Columbus. Let that sink in. Cocaine in a mummy. The plants that produce these substances, tobacco and coca, are native to the Americas. They weren't cultivated in Africa, Asia, or Europe until after 1492. So how did these Old World corpses end up testing positive for New World drugs centuries before Columbus was even born? The academic world scrambled. Contamination, some said. Maybe the mummies were exposed to modern tobacco or handled with unwashed hands. Maybe the lab work was flawed. Critics picked apart the findings, citing issues with controls and methodology. But the results were repeated. And not just in one mummy, multiple samples, multiple individuals. Not all showed both compounds, but the patterns were unsettling enough to keep the debate alive. There are, of course, alternative explanations. Some argue that Old World plants, like certain species of nightshade, contain similar alkaloids. Others suggest the presence of unknown trade routes, long-lost maritime networks that ferried botanical goods across oceans in the ancient world. If so, it would upend centuries of understanding about global contact. But no boats have been found, no coca caches in Egyptian tombs, no tobacco jars inscribed with hieroglyphs, just chemistry and confusion. So, is it real? Is it fraud? Or is it evidence of an ancient world far more interconnected than we've ever imagined? Whatever the truth, it lingers beneath wrappings, inside hair follicles, at the border of science and scandal. And from the tomb to the desert, the trail leads to another mummion with a face that doesn't quite belong, and a story still unfolding beneath the Nevada dust. The enigmatic figures of the Spirit Cave mummy. Found in a dry Nevada cave in 1940, the Spirit Cave mummy is one of the oldest, naturally preserved human remains ever discovered in North America. Wrapped in a woven shroud and tucked into a shallow grave, he slept for over 10,000 years until modern science woke him up and made everything complicated. At first, the mummy was misdated. Believed to be only a few thousand years old, he was stored quietly in museum archives. Then, in the 1990s, radiocarbon dating shattered expectations. The mummy was more than 10,000 years old, older than the pyramids, older than agriculture in the Americas. Suddenly, this wasn't just a curiosity, it was a bombshell. But it wasn't just the age, it was the features. Early descriptions noted the mummy's skull as Caucasoid in appearance. Triggering a familiar and controversial debate: was this man an ancestor of modern Native Americans? Or evidence of an entirely different early wave of migration? Some researchers speculated about lost races, ancient mariners, or a ghost population that came before everyone else. Local tribes, especially the Fallon Paiute Shoshone, saw something different. They saw an ancestor. They demanded repatriation. A lengthy legal battle ensued, pitting cultural heritage against scientific inquiry. Who did the mummy belong to? The answer would come not from courts, but from DNA. In 2016, genetic testing finally provided clarity. The Spirit Cave mummy was most closely related to modern Native American populations, including the very tribes seeking to rebury him. The case was closed scientifically, spiritually, politically. But the questions remain. Who were these early people, roaming the Great Basin before Clovis? What were their origins, their roots, their rituals? And why do some of their remains look so different from later populations? The Spirit Cave mummy isn't just a relic, he's a mirror, reflecting both the complexity of human migration and the tangled legacy of archaeology in the Americas. And while he lay wrapped in fiber, others were fashioning tools for a very different kind of conquest, bringing down beasts 10 times their size with nothing more than sharp stone and shared strategy. The Megafauna hunting techniques of Clovis people. The Clovis people didn't have metal. They didn't have wheels. They didn't have writing. What they had were point sleek, fluted spearheads made of flint and obsidian, sharp enough to cut through hide and bone, and deadly enough to bring down a mammoth. The Clovis culture, which flourished around 13,000 years ago, is best known for its distinctive stone tools, particularly the Clovis point. These weren't just sharp rocks. They were aerodynamic masterpieces, thin, symmetrical, pressure-flaked with surgical precision. And they weren't for show. They were for war. Specifically, war against giants. Clovis hunters roamed a continent teeming with megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, dire wolves, short-faced bears, prey that could crush a human with a single step. Yet somehow, these people hunted them, and not just one-on-one. They hunted in groups, with strategy, with traps, with patience. The most iconic kill sites tell the story clusters of mammoth bones interspersed with Clovis points, often showing signs of butchering. Some sites suggest the use of kill zones, natural choke points where animals could be cornered or driven into ambushes. In some places, bones were found piled, dismembered with intent, tools still lying nearby like a signature in stone. But the Clovis toolkit was broader than just points. They used scrapers, gravers, and bone tools to process hides, meat, and sinew. They knew how to turn a 10-ton carcass into food, clothing, weapons, and shelter. Their success, however, may have been their undoing. As the megafauna dwindled, whether from climate change, overhunting, or both, the Clovis culture faded too. The age of giants ended. The fluted point was buried with it. Yet the echoes remain in the artifacts, in the kill sites, in the legacy of a people who took on the Ice Age's deadliest creatures and won. And in that same continent of extremes, far to the south, others were carving miracles into desert stone, not to kill, but to thrive. The Nazca aqueducts, Puquios. The Nazca are best known for their enigmatic geoglyphs, lines and animals etched into the desert floor, visible only from the sky, but hidden beneath the sand lies a feat even more astonishing, the Puquios. Ancient aqueducts, carved deep into the earth, spiraling down like desert corkscrews, channeling water with such ingenuity that some still function today. These aren't simple ditches. They're a hydraulic network designed to capture, filter, and move underground water across one of the driest places on Earth. And no one knows exactly how the Nazca pulled it off. The Puquios are believed to be at least 1,500 years old. They consist of deep, stone-lined shafts descending into underground aquifers, with horizontal channels connecting them. Some shafts are shaped like whirlpool spirals that seem both functional and symbolic. Wind rushing down these funnels pressurizes the flow, pushing water through the canals to fields, homes, and ceremonial centers. But how did the Nazca know where to dig? They had no ground-penetrating radar, no modern engineering. Yet, they identified water sources hidden beneath layers of rock and sand, and constructed systems so durable they've outlasted empires. Were the Puquios mapped using sacred geometry, dowsing, trial and error refined over generations? Their construction demands a level of geological knowledge we didn't expect from ancient civilizations. And beyond function, there's form. The spirals echo the geometry of the Nazca Lines. Coincidence? Or were the Puquios not just irrigation tools, but sacred instruments? Were they part of a larger cosmological system linking Earth, water, and sky in a single unified design? Whatever their origin, the aqueducts stand as proof. The Nazca weren't just artists, they were engineers, masters of survival in a land where rain doesn't fall for years. They didn't just mark the desert, they made it bloom. And in that blooming soil, something else grew, a plant with power, with smoke, with spirit, a plant that would shape the rituals of an entire continent. The early use of tobacco in the Americas? Long before European ships crossed the Atlantic, long before cigar smoke drifted through colonial drawing rooms or cigarettes coiled into 20th century addiction, tobacco was already sacred. In the ancient Americas, it was far more than a crop. It was a ritual, a medicine, a message to the gods. Tobacco's use predates recorded history, stretching back thousands of years. Archaeological findings from caves, burial sites, and ceremonial centers reveal traces of nicotine residue in pipes, on textiles, and even within mummified remains. The plant appears to have been cultivated and revered across much of the continent from the Arctic to the Amazon. But what's still unclear is how early and how widespread that use truly was. Pipes uncovered in the southeastern United States date back more than 3,000 years, with chemical analysis confirming they once burned tobacco. In South America, depictions of smoking rituals and tobacco leaves appear in ancient ceramics and carvings. But tobacco wasn't just smoked, it was chewed, snuffed, ingested, and even used as enema infusions in certain ceremonial contexts. Yes, really. Why so much reverence for a leafy stimulant? Because tobacco wasn't seen as recreational, it was transformative, a vehicle for visions, prayer, communication with ancestors. Among the Maya, gods were said to smoke. Among the Plains tribes, tobacco smoke carried words to the spirit world. In Amazonian tribes, it was a tool of the shamana way to purge illness, ward off spirits, or enter altered states. Yet the origins of its cultivation remain hazy. Did the knowledge of tobacco's psychoactive effects arise independently in different regions? Or did early agriculturalists share it via vast trade routes stretching across the continent? And then there's the question of domestication. Wild tobacco is harsher, less potent. Cultivated strains, particularly Nicotiana tabacum and Nicotiana rustica, were selectively bred for strength and ritual efficacy. Someone's figured out how to engineer the plant for spiritual purpose. That's not just botany. That's ideology encoded in agriculture. So when tobacco finally reached Europe, it didn't just bring a new crop, it brought echoes of ancient ceremonies, whispered in smoke. And the echoes are louder still in the places where that smoke rose from sacrifice, blood, and belief. The Moundville sacrifices. In Alabama, near the Black Warrior River, there once stood a city of mounds, Moundville, a major Mississippian cultural center, home to thousands, bristling with earthworks, wooden palisades, and platform mounds crowned by elite residences and temples. But beneath its surface lies a darker legus evidence of ritual sacrifice, bloodletting, and social control masked in ceremonial grandeur. The site flourished between 1000 and 1450 CE. At its height, it was the second largest site of its kind in North America. It wasn't just a villagette, it was a cosmological diagram. The layout of Moundville suggests a sacred map, with mounds and plazas arranged to reflect celestial order, the upper world, the middle world, and the underworld. Burials here were anything but equal. Some grave cellites were loaded with shell beads, copper ornaments, effigy vessels, and ceremonial axes. Others, less ornate, showed signs of trauma, skull fractures, decapitation, limb removal. Mass graves contained stacked bodies, possibly war captives or sacrificial victims offered during large ceremonial events. Then there's the iconography. Artifacts from Moundville depict themes of death, warfare, and spiritual transformation. The Birdman, figure a warrior or god associated with the upper world, is a recurring motif. So too are severed heads, weeping eyes, and other symbols of ritual power. This wasn't random violence. It was theater, cosmic reenactment, a political performance staged with real blood. Sacrifices were likely tied to calendrical events, celestial alignments, or elite funerals moments when the veil between worlds thinned and power had to be fed with death. But the full extent of the violence remains uncertain. Was it occasional or systemic? Were victims volunteers, chosen by fate or status? Or were they enslaved enemies, brought in chains and laid before the gods? What's clear is that Moundville was a city of spectacle. The living gathered to witness death not as horror, but as necessity. The earth demanded it. The ancestors demanded it. The stars, in their cold silence, watched it happen. And while Moundville measured its seasons in sacrifice, another mystery brewed to the north, a bridge of land that once connected worlds and then vanished beneath rising seas. The mystery of the Bering Land Bridge closures. We know it existed. Once, during the Ice Age, a vast land bridge, Beringia, stretched from Siberia to Alaska, it was more than a narrow isthmus. It was a corridor, hundreds of miles wide, connecting the old world to the new. A place of tundra, rivers, and migrating herds. And humans. But Beringia didn't just appear and vanish once. It opened and closed repeatedly over the past few 100,000 years, shaped by the rise and fall of sea levels. The big mystery isn't that it existed, it's when exactly it was crossable, how people used it, and what happened when it closed. Most models agree that Beringia was open during the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago. Sea levels were lower, and massive ice sheets covered much of Canada. The problem? Those ice sheets also blocked southern migration routes. If people crossed into Alaska, they would have been Trapetus-locked. So did the first Americans come earlier, before the glaciers thickened, or later, through an ice-free corridor that opened around 13,000 years ago? Or did they follow the Pacific coastline by boat, hugging the kelp highway, avoiding ice altogether? Each theory rewrites the timeline of American settlement, and each is tied to the mystery of Beringia's closures. When the land bridge flooded around 11,000 years ago, it marked the end of a migratory era. Rising seas drowned the passageway. Whatever cultural, genetic, and ecological exchange had existed between continents was severed. The Americas became isolated. But what happened on Beringia before it disappeared? Was it a homeland, not just a highway? Evidence suggests people may have lived there for millennia, forming a unique culture in the no-man's land between ice and ocean. Yet because that land is now underwater, the proof is hard to reach. Sonar surveys hint at buried landscapes, ancient riverbeds, possible human sites deep below the waves. But exploration is limited, and the data remains fragmentary. So we're left with questions. How many migrations crossed the bridge? How early? How late? And what did they leave behind when the sea finally took the last step? Somewhere beneath the silt of the Bering Sea lie the beginnings of American history, along with the roots of myth, movement, and survival. And far south, another silence waits to be decoded, not in stone or skeleton, but in color, pattern, and an unreadable script. The unidentified glyphs of the Paracas textiles. They come wrapped in whispers textiles buried with the dead, unearthed from ancient graves along the Peruvian coast, vivid as the day they were woven. The Paracas culture, flourishing between 700 BCE and 200 CE, left behind more than stunning embroidery. They left messages, symbols, glyphs, and no one knows how to read them. These textiles aren't just decorative. They're intricate, deliberate, and consistent, featuring geometric patterns and stylized figures repeated across garments, cloaks, and shrouds. Some scholars believe they encode meaning, family lineage, tribal affiliation, or even cosmological belief. Others argue they may represent a form of proto-writing in early visual language, not unlike the glyphs that evolved later in Mesoamerican scripts. But the patterns aren't random. Some figures appear to morph human-animal hybrids mid-transformation, warriors with fanged masks, beings that float as if between worlds. These are stories, etched in thread. The warp and weft aren't just for show, they may carry information. Like the Nazca Lines carved into desert, these textiles seem designed to be read. And yet, no one can. There's no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual codex, just fragments wrapped around the dead, layered in mystery, stitched in silence. Adding to the enigma is the preservation. The arid climate of the Paracas Peninsula has kept these textiles in stunning condition. Reds, blues, gold colors still bright after 2,000 years. What's faded is our ability to understand their context. Were these garments worn in life, or woven specifically for the afterlife? Were the glyphs, prayers, warnings, names, were they formulaic, like legal contracts, or fluid like poetry? The Paracas left no stone inscriptions, no monumental pyramids. They expressed themselves in fibers, in threads, in codes that touch the divine. And as the shrouds unwind, so does our confidence in what we think we know about early Andean civilization. Because if they wrote in thread, who else might have spoken before the silence of Clovis? The pre-Clovis sites and their significance. For decades, the Clovis culture reigned as the first Americans. Their distinctive fluted stone points, dated to around 13,000 years ago, marked the earliest confirmed human presence in North America, or so we thought. Enter the pre-Clovis sites: Monte Verde in Chile, Cactus Hill in Virginia, Buttermilk Creek in Texas. These are places where the soil tells a different story of humans arriving thousands of years before Clovis. The implications are enormous. Monte Verde, for example, dates to nearly 15,000 years ago. That's at least 2,000 years earlier than Clovis, and it's in South America, which means people had to have arrived, settled, and spread through an entire continent well before the Clovis toolkit ever appeared. Other sites push the envelope even further. Stone tools, butchered bones, hearth remains saw lacking Clovis technology, but suggesting human activity. Some go back as far as 20,000 years. A few even claim 30,000 or more, though these remain deeply controversial. If these early dates hold, they destroy the Clovis first model. That tidy narrative that humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge and then rapidly colonized the Americas in a single wave starts to crumble. The new model is messier, older, and more fascinating. Maybe people arrived in multiple waves. Maybe they hugged the Pacific coast in boats, long before the ice-free corridor opened. Maybe they came even earlier than we dare imagine, following prey into lands untouched by human hands. But here's the thing. Pre-Clovis sites are often dismissed, contested, or buried in academic warfare. The tools are too crude, the dating methods too suspect, the implications too uncomfortable. Because rewriting the first chapter of human history in the Americas isn't just a correction, it's a revolution. And beneath that revolution, at the heart of early spirituality, lies another secretone, not carved in stone or strung in thread, but eaten, worshipped, and hallucinated into myth: the use of psilocybin mushrooms in ancient Mesoamerican rituals. They don't leave bones, they don't leave tools, but they leave trace etched in stone, painted on pottery, murmured in myth. Psilocybin mushrooms, sacred, strange, and deeply tied to the spiritual life of ancient Mesoamerica. Among the Maya, the Mixtec, and other early cultures, mushrooms weren't just food, they were divine. Known by names like flesh of the gods, these fungi played a central role in ritual, divination, and communication with the supernatural. But just how widespread was their use? And how exactly were they integrated into the rhythms of ancient life? Mushroom stone-scarved effigies with caps resembling fungashave been found across Guatemala and southern Mexico, often in ceremonial contexts. These sculptures suggest not only reverence but a symbolic understanding of the mushroom as a gateway to other realms. Their anthropomorphic feature human faces, peeking from beneath mushroom caps, suggest transformation, transgression, transcendence. But the ritual use of psilocybin wasn't just about getting high. It was a structured, sacred experience. A journey undertaken with preparation, fasting, and intention. Shamans likely used them to diagnose illness, receive visions, or access the spirit world. They were instruments, not indulgences. In some murals and codices, mushroom imagery appears alongside jaguars, serpents, and stars' cosmic metaphors for death, rebirth, and divine knowledge. These weren't hallucinations in the modern sense. They were revelations. Contact with gods, ancestors, or elemental forces that shaped the world. And then came conquest. Spanish chroniclers recorded indigenous people using diabolical mushrooms in ceremonies that horrified missionaries. Efforts to suppress these rituals were swift and brutal. Yet the traditions never fully died. In remote corners of Mexico, psilocybin remains part of spiritual life, passed down through oral tradition and hidden rites. But archaeology struggles to prove what belief preserves. Mushrooms rot, evidence decays. What survives are symbols enigmatic, poetic, and half erased by time. The rest is guesswork, stitched together from sacred fragments. And as the last visions fade, another mystery waits in the cold silence of the Arctica culture that rose and fell in a land where the sun vanishes, and with it, the people who lived at the edge of the world. The disappearance of the Dorset culture. They lived in silence, ice-crusted silence. The Dorset people thrived in the Arctic for centuries, building a civilization of snow, stone, and seal fat. Then, just as mysteriously as they came, they were gone, swallowed by time and tundra. Emerging around 500 BCE and vanishing sometime after 1000 CE, the Dorset culture predates the modern Inuit. They left behind no writing, no legends we can read, only the tools, the homes, and the haunting traces of a people who lived at the edge of survival. They weren't nomads in the usual sense. Dorset groups established semi-permanent camps, dwelling in dugout homes covered in skins and snow. Their tools finely carved harpoon heads, snow knives, and needles show advanced craftsmanship. Soapstone lamps lit their world. Carvings of humans and animals hint at a spiritual life, a mythos hidden beneath ice. They were excellent hunters of marine mammal seals, primarily using techniques and tools specialized for life among the floes. And yet, they didn't use bows and arrows, unlike later Arctic peoples. Nor did they develop the dog sled or umiak boats. Their isolation was profound, even within the vast openness of the Arctic. But what happened to them? By the time the Tule-Pipalve, ancestors of modern Inuit, migrated across the Arctic from Alaska, the Dorset had already begun to decline. The two cultures overlapped slightly, but there's little evidence of interaction. No trade, no war, just replacement. One people arriving, another fading. Some theorize climate change played a role. A minor warming period could have disrupted the sea ice patterns essential to Dorset hunting. Others propose disease, isolation, or cultural rigidity, a refusal to adapt in the face of change. Perhaps it was all of the above. Or perhaps they didn't vanish entirely. Inuit oral traditions tell of the Tuniet, a shy, strong race who lived in the land before them. Some say they fled. Some say they were absorbed. Others say they still exist, ghosts haunting the permafrost, stories woven into the aurora. The Dorset left no cries, no farewell, just snow-sunken shelters, and carvings that gaze back across time with quiet, unknowable eyes. And from the Arctic silence, we slide into crimson blood rites of a desert people who made decapitation not just a punishment, but a performance. The Moche decapitation rituals. The Moche civilization didn't flinch from death. On the contrary, they elevated it, worshipped it, choreographed it. And nowhere is that more clear than in their decapitation rituals. Flourishing along the arid northern coast of Peru between 100 and 800 CE, the Moche were masters of irrigation, metallurgy, and narrative pottery. But their art tells a darker story of sacrifice, bloodletting, and the precise removal of heads. Decapitation wasn't a side note, it was central. Moche pottery and murals show priests wielding tumi nives crescent-bladed ceremonial blades beheading captives, catching blood in goblets, offering it to gods. Warriors march in file, stripped of clothing, hands bound. Victors stand triumphant, their opponents' heads dangling like trophies. This wasn't chaos, it was ritual. The Moche believed blood had power, the power to feed the earth, the gods, the ancestors. Sacrifice wasn't merely execution, it was a sacred transaction, a communication between planes of existence. And decapitation? That was the exclamation point at the end of a divine sentence. Skulls with drilled holes, possibly to string them like pendant shave, been found in ceremonial contexts. Some tombs, like that of the famous Lord of Sipan, include both honored elites and sacrificed attendants, their heads cleanly severed, their roles in the afterlife sealed in blood. But who were the victims? Were they criminals? War captives? Volunteers? Some evidence suggests ritualized combat determined who would be sacrificed, a ceremonial duel with stakes measured in immortality. Others may have been chosen through divination, dreams, or ancestral mandate. Still, much remains unclear. Were the Moche ruled by a class of warrior priests who legitimized their power through blood? Or were these decapitations symbolic enactments of seasonal cycles, life, death, renewal? The answer may be both. And while the Moche carved their visions in clay, other Andean peoples etched their brilliance into gold, copper, and silver, leaving behind a metallurgical mystery that still gleams in the dark. The advanced metallurgy of the ancient Peruvians. Before Europeans dreamed of the New World, ancient Peruvians were melting metal like alchemists. Long before the Inca, cultures like the Moche, Nazca, and Wari had already mastered metallurgy, not just for tools, but for art, for status, for sacred purpose. They didn't smelt iron, but they didn't need to. What they did with gold, silver, and copper borders on, unbelievable. They hammered thin sheets of gold so fine they fluttered like cloth. They cast intricate figurines with lost wax techniques. They created alloys like tembaga, a gold-copper blend that mimicked the sheen of pure gold while being harder and more versatile. Some artifacts even show evidence of depletion gilding, a process where surface copper is removed chemically to leave behind a layer of pure gold. These aren't flukes. They're the product of deep knowledge of chemistry, temperature control, and design, all without written instruction. The Moche, in particular, crafted nose rings, headdresses, and ceremonial knives with precision rivaling Renaissance goldsmiths. The Lambayek and Shimu followed with even more elaborate metallurgy, creating full-body armor from bronze-like materials and masks that shimmered like the sun. But these objects weren't for daily use. They were ritual tools, offerings, status symbols buried with elites, or sacrificed to mountains and oceans. Some were found in high-altitude caches left as tributes in freezing, oxygen-thin air. And then there's the technology itself. Furnaces, crucibles, blowpipes, bellows. The infrastructure needed to melt metal at thousands of degrees existed in places where everything from fuel to ore had to be hauled by hand. Every bracelet, every mask, every knife was a victory over nature. But who taught them? Where did this knowledge come from? There's no evidence of step-by-step evolution. The sophistication appears early, almost fully formed. Was it passed through shamanic guilds? Taught in temples? Hidden in oral traditions now lost? The truth is, these artisans weren't just smiths. They were priests, scientists, visionaries. And as we follow their handiwork north, we find another face carved in stone, expression frozen in time, far from where it should be, asking a question no one can answer. The stone head of Caledonia, New York. It was 1932 when a peculiar discovery surfaced from a farmer's field in Caledonia, New York. Unearthed while digging in the soft earth, the artifact was no pottery shard or rusted toolet, was a stone head. Broad face, strong brow, mysterious expression, carved from a kind of soft sandstone not native to the immediate area, and unlike anything else found in the region. Dubbed the Stone Head of Caledonia, it immediately sparked controversy. Who carved it? When? And what was it doing in a part of New York more associated with Iroquois Confederacy villages than with statuary? The head doesn't match typical Native American art from the Northeast. It's stylized, yes, but not in any recognizable tradition. Some claim it resembles European sculpture. Others see echoes of Mesoamerican style, particularly in the flattened features and geometric lines. That would suggest either a transcontinental influence or something even stranger. Could it be a hoax? That's always on the table. Critics have pointed out the lack of excavation context. There were no associated tools, no clear stratigraphy, and the head wasn't found deeply buried. But no one has definitively debunked it either. It's not a mass-produced garden ornament. The carving is unique, weathered, and seems to have been made with pre-modern tools. Then there's the oral tradition or lack thereof. Local Haudenosaunee stories don't mention anything resembling the artifact, at least not directly. That absence raises more questions. Is the head a relic from a forgotten local artist, a ceremonial object from a lost group, or a visitor transported from afar and left behind? Theories swirl. Some propose a wandering sculptor of ancient times. Others float the idea of pre-Columbian contact, perhaps Norse, perhaps Celtic, perhaps a civilization no one has yet identified. Like the Kensington Runestone or the Newport Tower, the Caledonia head sits in the murky middle between mystery and misinterpretation. It's still kept in a museum, but it hasn't revealed much. It just stares, stoic and silent, challenging anyone who walks by to guess its origin. And just as that face asks us who made it, another mystery rises from the mud and iconography of the Mississippi Valley. This one not a head, but a dragon. The dragon symbolism in Mississippian art. In the iconographic world of the Mississippian culture, those mound builders of the southeastern U.S. one motif keeps slithering through artifacts, murals, and carvings. The so-called horned serpent, or underwater panther, often called a dragon by modern observers, this creature isn't a myth in the European sense. It's something stranger, more terrifying, and more important. The Mississippians didn't write books, but they etched stories into copper plates, painted them on shell gorgets, and sculpted them into pottery. Many of these pieces depict a long-bodied, serpentine creature, sometimes winged, sometimes horned, often possessing fangs or antlers. It usually emerges from water, curls into spirals, and dominates the symbolic landscape. What was it? Some scholars interpret the horned serpent as a guardian of the underworld, a being associated with chaos, transformation, and boundary crossing. Others see it as a cosmic intermediary, bridging the watery underworld with the surface world and the sky above. Its presence appears in contexts of both fertility and destruction, a paradox, alive in clay. This isn't an isolated image. Variations of the horned serpent appear across many indigenous traditions throughout North America. The Cherokee call it uktena. The Great Lakes tribes speak of mishi peshu. The recurrence suggests something deeply archetypal, perhaps even rooted in real natural phenomena like whirlpools, water snakes, or meteors crashing into lakes. Yet among the Mississippians, it held a special status. The creature often accompanies warrior imagery, sun symbols, or other beings believed to control rain, fire, and growth. Was it a god? A demon? A totem? It's possible the dragon was a visual shorthand for the duality of nature life, giving and life-taking. It may have been invoked during ceremonies, battles, or funerals. But because we lack a written explanation, we're left to interpret its meaning from images alone, and those images refuse to be pinned down. The creature's mystery only deepens when you consider its context. A society that built giant mounds, developed complex social hierarchies, and may have used these dragon symbols to maintain cosmological and political order. But just as one culture's glyphs fade into obscurity, another script emerged soughter still, and possibly the first attempt at true writing in the Americas. The Olmec script's relationship to later writing systems. They were the first civilization in Mesoamerica, and maybe the first to write. The Olmec, mysterious and monumental, left behind colossal heads, jade figurines, and symbols that hint at something revolutionary. The birth of writing in the New World. Known as the Olmec script, these glyph-like markings appear on artifacts like the Cascajal flattened slab inscribed with 62 unique symbols found in what is now Veracruz, Mexico. If authentic, it's the oldest known writing system in the Americas, dating to around 900 BCE. But the script's legitimacy and its connections remain hotly debated. Unlike the better-known Maya script, the Olmec symbols are sparse. No long texts, no carved stelae recounting dynastic conquests. Just short inscriptions, often on small object celts, pottery, and ceremonial items. Are they names, titles, offerings? We don't know. What complicates matters is the script's unique character. Some symbols appear abstract. Others resemble animals, plants, or tools. Some repeat. Some are directional. But we don't have enough examples to crack the code. There's no bilingual key, no deciphered descendant. Yet linguistic threads stretch forward. Some scholars believe the Olmec script influenced later systems like the Zapotec glyphs and eventually the Maya writing system. Perhaps it provided the conceptual foundation, the idea that language could be recorded, that power could be etched into stone. But how much was inherited, and how much was reinvented? Some argue that the Olmec script was a proto-writing system used for religious or political purposes, not for full narrative recording. Others argue it was a full writing system that simply didn't survive long enough to expand. Or perhaps it survived, but its successors restructured it beyond recognition. What's undeniable is that the Olmec were thinkers, builders, carvers of meaning. Their glyphs didn't just decorate. They encoded power, identity, myth. And even if we can't read them, we can see their echoes rippling through every later civilization that inscribes stone with the sacred weight of words. And just as knots and cords once carried similar meaning for Andean empires, so too did another systemon of the strangest forms of communication ever devised, and possibly one of the most complex, the origin of the Incan Quipu system. It looks like a tangle of strings, harmless, primitive, but the Quipu also spelled Quipuis, one of the most enigmatic communication systems ever developed. Crafted from knotted cords of varying colors, lengths, and twists, the Quipu was the data keeper of the Inca Empire, a memory device woven in fiber. And to this day, no one fully understands how it worked or how far its reach extended. The Inca, who ruled a sprawling civilization across the Andes from the 13th to the 16th centuries, didn't use a writing system like hieroglyphs or alphabets. They used quipus. With them, administrators tracked census data, tribute, military supplies, agricultural yields, anything that could be counted, measured, or taxed. These were the ledgers of an empire. Portable spreadsheets, knotted logic. Each Quipu consists of a primary cord, from which hang dozens, sometimes hundreds soft pendant cords. The knots come in various forms: figure eight, long knots, single knots. Their position along the cord, their type, and their spacing all seem to encode information. But here's where it gets complicated. We understand the basics of their numerical system, which operated on a base 10 structure. But beyond that, mystery. Some researchers believe Quipus encoded narrative information names, events, even laws through subtle patterns in color, material, and knot type. If true, the Quipu wasn't just a calculator. It was a library. But with the arrival of the Spanish, the system was abruptly cut off. Missionaries, suspicious of the cord's power, ordered many Quipus destroyed. What survived was stripped of its cultural context. Today, hundreds of quipus lie in museum drawers, unreadable, like hard drives with corrupted files. We don't know where the system originated. Pre-Inca cultures like the Wari and the Caral-Supe seem to have used early forms of Quipu, suggesting it may be thousands of years old. But no single moment marks its birth. Like a spider's web stretching through time, the Quipu remains elusive, fragile, beautiful, and built with a logic just out of reach. And while the Inca wove knowledge into string, other hands etched giants into the desert floor, far to the west where stone outlines whisper to the sky. The giant effigies of the California desert. You won't notice them from the ground. You have to rise hundreds of feet above the cracked and blistered soil of the Colorado Deserto, see the figures etched into the earth. Humanoid forms with outstretched arms, serpents winding, quadrupeds leaping, all rendered in massive scale by ancient hands. These are the blithe, intaglios enormous geoglyphs carved into the desert floor, similar in execution and mystery to Peru's Nazca Lines, but far less known. Located near the California-Arizona border, they consist of large outlines made by scraping away the top layer of dark gravel to reveal lighter soil beneath. The largest figure stretches over 170 feet long. But who made them? And why? Local Mojave and Quechan tribes have oral traditions describing powerful spirit beings associated with these forms. Some say they depict Mastamo, a creator deity. Others suggest they represent ceremonial dancers, animals tied to seasonal rituals, or celestial figures in the night sky. No tools have been found nearby, no written records, no clear archaeological context. Radiocarbon dating of surrounding artifacts is sparse, with most estimates placing the glyphs somewhere between 450 and 2,000 years old. But their creators? Unknown. Their exact meanings? Lost in wind and sand. What's striking is the isolation. Unlike the Nazca Lines, which sit near massive urban centers, the blithe intaglios are remote. No temples, no cities, just earth and figure. This suggests their purpose wasn't practical. It was symbolic, spiritual, possibly astronomical. Some researchers propose the geoglyphs align with certain celestial event solstices, equinoxes, star risings. Others see them as territorial markers, boundary symbols meant to impress or intimidate. Still others think they were meant to be seen by the gods themselves, cosmic signals carved into a landscape of silence. But the mystery persists. How did the creators view these massive designs? With no aerial technology, how did they understand the full scale or shape of their work? Did they use hills as vantage points? Grids and stakes for planning? Or were they guided by memory, myth, and unspoken maps? The blithe intaglios remind us that some messages are meant to be seen from above, and just off the coast, beneath another stretch of mysterious water, another message waits not in lines, but in stone, sunken and silent. The enigmatic sunken city of Bimini Road. Just off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas lies a strange submerged formation. Large, flat, rectangular stones, arranged in an apparent path beneath shallow, turquoise water. Called the Bimini Road, it stretches for about a third of a mile and has fueled decades of speculation. Is it a natural phenomenon, or the remains of an ancient, lost city? Discovered in 1968, the formation immediately ignited theories. The stones appear to be placed in a linear pattern, some stacked or fitted tightly, suggesting artificial construction. To believers, this wasn't just a road, it was part of a wall, a dock, or the remnants of a once great civilization swallowed by the sea. Atlantis, Lemuria, lost continents. The Bimini Road was quickly swept into these legendary currents. Proponents pointed to the stone's shape and placement as proof of intelligent design. Critics argued that the formation is a classic example of beach rock fracturing, natural geological process, where sedimentary rock cracks into rectangular forms, giving the illusion of paving stones. But the mystery deepens with context. The region around Bimini has yielded oddities, unusual artifacts, stories of underwater structures, and accounts from local divers who claim to have seen columns, steps, and walls deep below the waves. Even Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, famously predicted in the 1930s that remnants of Atlantis would rise near Bimini in the late 1960s, saw detail that, by sheer coincidence, aligns with the timing of the discovery. Whether that's prophecy, retrofitting, or coincidence is a debate all its own. Scientific analysis leans toward natural formation. Geological studies suggest the rocks match local beach rock compositions and were shaped by erosion and tectonic processes. But skepticism remains, especially among alternative historians and independent researchers who argue the formation's symmetry and scale point to human intervention. Whether natural or man-made, the Bimini Road continues to attract divers, dreamers, and skeptics. It's not just a path underwater, it's a pathway into imagination, into questions of what was lost, what's real, and what stories the sea keeps buried. And further inland, across rivers and buried in forest loam, another circle awaits not of stone, but of timber. An ancient solar clock, standing where civilization once danced with the seasons. The Cahokia Woodhenge. Long before Stonehenge cast its shadow over the English grasslands, another circle simpler in material, but equally profound stood tall on the North American continent. It wasn't made of stone. It was made of wood. And it wasn't for the dead. It was for the cosmos. Just west of present-day St. Louis, in what is now Illinois, the city of Cahokia once thrived as the largest urban center north of Mesoamerica. At its peak around 1100 CE, it was home to as many as 20,000 people, larger than London at the time. The centerpiece was Monk's Mound, a towering earthwork platform. But off to the side, something quieter loomed. Woodhenge. Discovered in the 1960s through post-hole patterns in the soil, Woodhenge refers to a series of large timber circle siege, one consisting of evenly spaced cedar posts driven deep into the earth, forming perfect rings. The largest measured over 400 feet in diameter. But these weren't fences, they weren't housing structures, they were calendars. The posts aligned with celestial event solstices, equinoxes, and lunar standstills. Stand at the center, and the rising sun on the winter solstice will appear between two specific posts. Other alignments mark the summer solstice and spring and autumn equinoxes. This wasn't incidental, it was intentional. An enormous timepiece built by people who understood the sky. But how did they do it? No written records, no metal tools, no telescopes, and yet, the accuracy of the alignments suggests generations of careful observation. Priests, astronomers, whatever their title, would have tracked the movement of the sun and stars across decades, encoding that knowledge into the land with timber and symmetry. The Woodhenge structures were rebuilt multiple times over centuries, each one larger and more complex. Some suggest they were used not only for tracking time but also for staging, rituals, seasonal festivals, political events, or public ceremonies tied to the sun's cycle. But why was it eventually abandoned? By 1300, Cahokia began to decline. Environmental stress? Resource depletion? Social upheaval? All likely. And with its fall, Woodhenge fell too forgotten until its outlines were rediscovered in the modern era. Now reconstructed using contemporary interpretations, Woodhenge stands once again a ring of posts watching the sunrise, just as it did 1,000 years ago. And just as Cahokia measured time and timber, others told of beings who rose from the water, strangers, gods, or something stranger still, arriving where the sea met the sky. The water people legends of the Pacific Northwest. Along the coasts of the Pacific Northwest, from Alaska to Northern California, indigenous oral traditions speak of the water people beings from the sea, not quite human, who appeared long ago and changed everything. These stories vary from tribe to tribe, but a thread of awe, fear, and reverence runs through them all. Some legends describe tall, pale-skinned figures who arrived in canoes with strange tools, unfamiliar tongues, and knowledge beyond the horizon. Others depict aquatic beings, fish, half-human capable of shape-shifting, controlling tides, or luring people into the ocean. Sometimes, they're saviors. Sometimes, they're thieves. Always they are other. Who were the water people? To some scholars, these stories might reference early maritime cultures, long before recorded contact with Europeans. Could these legends be folk memories of ancient visitors from across the Pacific? Mariners from Asia or Polynesia who arrived in North America centuries or millennia before Columbus or Cook. The Pacific is vast, but not impassable, and its currents have carried more than driftwood. Alternatively, the water people could be metaphorical representations of natural phenomena, ancestral spirits, or symbolic intrusions of transformation. After all, in many indigenous cosmologies, the sea isn't just a boundary. It's a realm, alive, conscious, capable of birthing beings who bring change or disaster. But then there's the archaeological angle. Some coastal sites contain artifacts that defy easy categorization tools and bones from seafaring cultures not typically associated with inland tribes. In rare cases, linguistic traces suggest contact between far-flung language groups, as if knowledge once skipped along coastlines like stones. Still, hard evidence is elusive. What survives are the stories. Water people who vanished as quickly as they came, leaving behind only myths and mystery. Perhaps they were explorers. Perhaps they were metaphors. Perhaps they were both. And while the Pacific churns with forgotten arrivals, one serpent slithers not through water but through earth, its tail curled tightly in a spiral that still baffles the sky watchers and symbol readers alike. The purpose of the Great Serpent Mound's coiled tail. We've seen the Great Serpent Mound already, a 1,400-foot-long earth effigy in Ohio that winds across a ridgetop like a celestial dragon. Its head points to the setting sun on the summer solstice. Its body ripples in 7 undulations. But the real puzzle, the part that resists explanation more than any other, is the tail. Coiled in a tight triple spiral, the tail of the Serpent Mound doesn't resemble any natural snake anatomy. It's not defensive, it's not striking, it's abstract, almost geometric. And it may be the key to understanding the entire monument. What does it mean? One theory posits that the spiral represents a solar or lunar calendar tracking cycles of time in visual metaphor. Spirals often symbolize infinity or rebirth across cultures. The triple coil could mirror the phases of the moon, or the 3-part journey of the sunrise, zenith, and set. Others suggest it reflects astronomical events, perhaps even a record of eclipses or lunar standstills encoded in shape and shadow. Alternatively, the tail could be symbolic a portal, a point of origin or return. In many indigenous cosmologies, the spiral is a sacred form. It echoes in shells, galaxies, and storms. It represents journeys inward and outward, life cycles, the soul's path. Was the tail a place of spiritual entry, a focal point for ceremonies? Its position on the landscape may also matter. The Serpent Mound sits atop a rare geological anomaly ancient meteor impact site. Some propose that the tail's curl marks an energetic or spiritual center, mapping more than just stars. Still, no artifacts have been found inside the serpent, no burials in the tail. It is pure symbol, drawn at scale so vast it could only be fully understood from above. A message for the gods? For the sky itself? The truth is buried not just in soil, but in interpretation. And the spiral remains. Ancient, deliberate, uncoiled only in theory. And just as the tail spirals through time, another mystery dives into the past beneath the jungles of South America, where bones whisper of a human story older than anyone expected. The earliest evidence of human presence in South America. For decades, the story of human migration into the Americas followed a clear and convenient timeline. People crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia into Alaska around 13,000 years ago, spread southward through an ice-free corridor, and eventually populated the rest of the continent. Neat, linear, simple. But South America had other plans. In the windswept plains of southern Chile, the site of Monteverde sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. Beneath layers of peat and sediment, archaeologists found stone tools, remnants of wooden structures, and even preserved chunks of mastodon meat. The kicker? Radiocarbon dates suggested the site was nearly 15,000 years old, at least 2,000 years, before the Clovis culture, long considered the continent's first. Monteverde was the breach in the dam. It cracked the Clovis first model and opened the floodgates to re-examine other anomalous sites throughout South America. Pedra Furada in Brazil, with hearths and stone tools potentially dating back 30,000 years. The Toca de Tirapaya cave with its weathered yet deliberate-looking lithics, and even the Cueva del Milodon in Chile, where early human presence is hinted at alongside extinct megafauna. But the deeper you dig, the messier it gets. Each site is a battlefield: geologists versus archaeologists, skeptics versus iconoclasts. Are the stone tools really human-made, or the product of natural processes? Are the charcoal layers remnants of ancient fires, or lightning strikes, or plant decomposition? Still, the evidence keeps accumulating. Footprints in volcanic ash in Argentina, ancient campsites in the Andes, and DNA from ancient skeletons that suggest a rapid and early expansion across the continent. Some researchers even propose a coastal migration route where seafaring bands move down the Pacific coastline, exploiting marine resources and leapfrogging thousands of miles faster than land-bound migration would allow. And then there's the question of who these early people were. Their DNA doesn't show signs of radically different ancestry from other early Americans, but their tools, settlement patterns, and persistence suggest a deep-rooted occupation that has yet to be fully understood. What's clear is this: people were in South America earlier than we once believed, much earlier, possibly before the glaciers had even finished carving the northern landscape. They weren't just migrants. They were pioneers, explorers, survivors who hunted giant sloths, crossed mountains, navigated rivers, and left their footprints in mud and myth. Their story isn't finished. It's still being uncovered, one chipped stone, one fire pit, one ancient bone at a time. And the further back we go, the more it becomes clear. The first chapters of the human saga in the Americas are still largely unwritten. Because history doesn't start where we think it does. It starts where the evidence insists, and sometimes it starts thousands of years earlier than anyone dared to imagine.